It was a chilly November evening when my world shattered. I had just returned from a long day at the office, where the pressures of deadlines and meetings had been unusually intense. I was looking forward to a quiet night with my wife, Minnie, our usual routine of dinner and a movie, nothing extravagant, but it was ours. As I stepped into our home, a strange sensation washed over me. The house, usually warm and inviting, felt cold and foreign. Minnie's laughter, the sound that usually greeted me, was absent. I called her name, but there was no reply. The silence was thick, heavy with something I couldn't yet name. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with her back to me. Her posture was stiff, her head bowed. Something was wrong. My heart pounded as I approached her, and when she turned to face me, I saw the tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't her tears that shattered me, it was the words that followed. "I'm leaving you, Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm in love with someone else." I stood there, frozen in disbelief. My mind raced, trying to grasp the reality of her words. This was Minnie, my Minnie, the woman I had loved and cherished for years. I felt a numbness creep over me as I asked the question I dreaded the most. "Who is it?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "It's Oliver. My boss. Oliver." The name echoed in my mind like a cruel taunt. I had met him a few times at work functions, a smooth-talking executive who always seemed too polished, too perfect. I never liked the way he looked at Minnie, but I had dismissed it as paranoia. Now, I wished I had trusted my instincts. "Why, Minnie? What did I do wrong?" The words escaped me before I could stop them. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with regret, but there was something else there too, determination. "It's not you, Thomas. It's me. I need more, and Oliver. He can give me that. I'm sorry. Sorry." The word felt like a knife twisting in my gut. She stood up, brushing past me as if I were a stranger, not the man she had once vowed to love forever. I watched her walk away, her bags already packed by the door. She didn't look back as she left, and the sound of the door closing behind her felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I collapsed onto the couch, the same spot where she had delivered the news that would forever change my life. The reality of her betrayal began to sink in, the pain seeping into my bones like a bitter cold. My world, once so full of warmth and love, had been ripped apart in an instant. But even in the depths of my despair, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this destroy me. I would rebuild my life, no matter how long it took. Minnie had made her choice, and now, I had to make mine. Little did I know, that promise would lead me down a path I never could have imagined. The months that followed Minnie's departure were some of the darkest of my life. I drowned myself in work, trying to escape the suffocating loneliness that had become my constant companion. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love was now just a hollow shell, a reminder of everything I had lost. But as time passed, the pain began to dull. I threw myself into new projects at work, took up running to clear my mind, and even joined a local book club just to have some form of social interaction. Slowly, the pieces of my shattered life began to come together, forming something new. It was during one of those book club meetings that I first met Esther. She was a quiet woman, with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a sadness about her that I recognized all too well. She was a widow, I later learned, with 2 young children, a boy and a girl. We bonded over our shared losses, and before long, our conversations extended beyond book club meetings. Esther had a warmth about her that drew me in, a kindness that I hadn't realized I was missing. We began to spend more time together, not as 2 people seeking romance, but as 2 souls finding solace in each other's company. It was a slow, steady process, one that healed wounds I hadn't even known were still bleeding. Her children, Max and Lily, were shy at first, but they soon warmed up to me. Max, with his quiet, thoughtful nature, and Lily, with her boundless energy and infectious laughter, brought life back into my home. The more time I spent with them, the more I realized how much I had missed having a family. One evening, After a quiet dinner at Esther's house, I found myself lingering as the children went off to bed. There was a comfort in being there, a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. Esther and I sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow on her face. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. "And?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I hadn't seen before, hope. "I don't want to rush things, Thomas. But I want you to know that you've become important to me. You and the kids. We need you." Her words hit me like a wave, washing over me with a warmth I hadn't expected. In that moment, I realized how much I needed them too. This wasn't just about healing from the past, it was about building something new, something beautiful. "I need you too, Esther," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "All of you." From that night on, things changed between us. Our relationship deepened, not just between Esther and me, but with Max and Lily as well. We became a family, slowly but surely, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. But as fate would have it, just as I was beginning to believe in second chances, life threw me a curveball I never saw coming. It was a day like any other, a warm Saturday afternoon spent at the park with Esther and the kids. We were enjoying a picnic, the children running around, laughing and playing, while Esther and I watched them from a blanket under the shade of a large oak tree. It was a simple moment, but one that filled me with a deep sense of contentment. As I leaned back, sipping on a cool drink, I noticed a couple sitting on a bench across the park. They were hunched over, their clothes dirty and torn, their faces worn and tired. Something about them caught my attention, a vague familiarity that I couldn't quite place. And then, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Minnie. She was sitting there, her once beautiful face now gaunt and hollow, her eyes dull and lifeless. Beside her was Oliver, barely recognizable in his disheveled state. They were a far cry from the polished, glamorous couple that had torn my world apart. I couldn't believe it. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them, my mind racing with questions. How had they ended up like this? What had happened to the life they had chosen over me? I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. Esther noticed the change in my demeanor and followed my gaze. "Thomas, what is it?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. That's Minnie," I stammered. "And Oliver." She looked at them, her eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God." We watched in silence as Minnie and Oliver stood up, their movements slow and labored. They began to walk towards the edge of the park, their heads down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. I felt a strange mix of emotions, pity, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. "I need to talk to them," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Esther looked at me, concern etched on her face. "Are you sure? You don't owe them anything, Thomas." "I know," I replied, "but I need to understand. I need closure." She nodded, squeezing my hand in silent support. With a deep breath, I walked across the park, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached them, Minnie looked up, and our eyes met. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, and I saw the recognition dawn on her face. She tugged at Oliver's arm, and he looked up too, his expression one of disbelief. "Thomas?" Minnie's voice was barely audible, a broken shell of the confident woman she had once been. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What happened to you, Minnie? What happened to both of you?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head, unable to speak. Oliver, too, looked down, his shoulders slumped in defeat. We made a lot of mistakes," Oliver finally said, his voice rough and strained. "The company. Everything fell apart. We lost everything." Minnie sobbed quietly, her tears falling onto the tattered clothes she wore. "I was so wrong, Thomas. I thought I was leaving for something better, but it was all a lie. I destroyed everything." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The anger I had once felt towards them had faded, replaced by a deep sadness. They had chosen their path, and it had led them to this, a life of regret and despair. "I'm sorry, Thomas," Minnie whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved with all my heart, and I realized that I no longer harbored any resentment. Time had healed those wounds, and in their place was a sense of peace. "I forgive you, Minnie," I said softly. "But I've moved on. I've found happiness, and I hope you can find some peace too." Her sobs grew louder as she nodded, and Oliver placed a comforting arm around her. I took a step back, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. As I turned to walk away, I felt a sense of closure, a final chapter closing on that painful part of my life. Esther was waiting for me with open arms, her warm smile reassuring me that I had made the right choice. And as we walked back to our family, I knew that the future was finally, truly mine. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.